This module covers applying to dermatology. We'll provide an overview of the application process and talk about some activities on your application to consider, including research, volunteerism, advocacy, and extracurriculars. It's never too early to start thinking about your future career, but don't freak out if you're later in the process and still figuring out what you want to do. That's okay too. During M1 year of medical school, you can do some shadowing to make sure that dermatology is a good fit for you. You may even be able to begin some of your research, and you can also get involved in extracurricular activities at your school. If your school has a summer break between M1 and M2, that's a great time to do some research work and identify a mentor to help you with that. During M3, you're going to take step 1 and work really hard to do well in your clerkships and achieve honors as much as possible. Toward the end of M3, you're going to start planning for away rotations in your M4 schedule. And during M4, you're going to take step 2. You'll have your interviews, your ranking, and that whole process. Some of the key points when it comes to applying to dermatology are that it's a very competitive specialty. So the match rate is about 50% of people who apply. Everyone must have a backup plan. That is essential. You should be proactive and be a great mentee because that's how you get the most out of your mentor relationship. As I mentioned, dermatology has become one of the most competitive specialties, so it's really important to have a strong application. Some of the things that dermatology programs look for on an application are your academic performance, your research activities, and extracurriculars, particularly leadership roles in those groups. So when it comes to your preclinical years, M1 and M2, if your school's on a pass-fail system, then pass is sufficient. If you're not, and it's on a system with grades or with honors, it's really important to try to get good grades in those classes. The vast majority of derm applicants have really outstanding preclinical grades, and that's who you'll be competing with for positions. We used to always say a great step 1 score was really important, but now with step 1 moving to pass-fail, these grades in your preclinical years may become more important as an indicator of your academic ability. Third year is a very important year academically. Your performance on your clerkship rotations can be a predictor of how well you'll do as a resident, so programs give it a lot of weight when considering your application. It's also a time where you're going to meet faculty members who could be potential writers of letters of recommendation. And several programs do ask for a letter from a non-dermatologist, so this might be someone you work with closely, and often these faculty members really get to see your performance under the routine structure of the clerkships. Extracurriculars are also great. Of course, you want to really focus on your academics first. Don't do a lot of extracurriculars at the cost of studying and doing well in courses. First and second year often offer the most time for extracurriculars because everyone's on the same schedule and you don't have rotations keeping you late or making you come in early. You can get involved in activities that you're actually passionate about and interested in. It doesn't just have to be dermatology-related activities. It's really great if you can assume a leadership role. Some schools may have requirements or limits on how many leadership roles you can take to help make sure you don't become overwhelmed with extracurriculars, but it's a great opportunity to showcase your leadership skills. Sometimes interview questions will focus on your extracurriculars and what you did and what you really accomplished because they're interesting things for people to talk about. And then it's good to kind of continue your work in these extracurriculars into your clinical years if it's possible, because it shows that you cared about the causes and wanted to continue working on them. As soon as you mention that you're planning to apply to dermatology, everyone's going to tell you you need to get some research on your application. And I won't argue with that. Research is important, but why is it important? What does it tell them about you? Well, being involved in research shows that you're intellectually curious, you like to investigate and answer questions, which is a great trait to have in a physician. And it also helps to show that you want to further the advancement of the field of dermatology by discovering new things and expanding our knowledge base. It also shows your ability to perform, to complete a task, to carry a project through, to make sure things get done. It also presents you with a great opportunity to form a relationship with your mentor. So that way they can see your skills, your abilities, your strengths, and when they write you a letter of recommendation, they can talk about your wonderful performance in getting these research projects done. We have a whole separate module that talks about research that I recommend you review. Mentorship is an essential part of medicine, especially when it comes to applying to residency. Your mentor can serve as a source of research experience for you, especially if they have a strong track record in getting publications and completing projects. They can also help to advocate for you and make connections because they're going to know other people in the field and can recommend you and give a really strong personal recommendation, which will likely increase your chance of getting an interview at another program. They can also rate you a really great letter of recommendation. We've developed a guide for mentors, so if you have a mentor who's not as experienced, we hopefully can help them to get more experience and understand how they can best serve you. And there's also a skill to being a good mentee, so that's important too. You can consider your dermatology rotations basically a month-long audition for that program. So you always want to rotate at your home program if you have one. Statistically, that's where you have the best odds of matching. You also have better odds of matching at a program you rotate with. And it's for a simple reason. If we get to spend a whole month with a student, we really get to see your skills and attributes and get to know you pretty well compared to someone who we're only meeting on interview day. So it gives you an advantage over those people who weren't able to rotate at a program. You want to make sure that you walk a fine line of being enthusiastic, interested, but not annoying. Sometimes in the efforts to show that people are eager to learn derm, they just want to ask a million questions. So you've got to kind of hone that in and make sure that you're, showing you're interested, but not being overbearing. When in doubt, don't be afraid to ask an attending or ask a resident you're working with if you're being too overbearing. They will give you honest feedback if you elicit it. And we have another module that covers rotations and clerkships. Away rotations are a great opportunity for you to get to know a program that you're interested in, as well as for them to get to know you. And as I mentioned in the last slide, it also increases your chances of getting an interview and maybe even matching there. So things to think about when you're choosing where to do an away rotation is the location. Is it somewhere you'd like to practice in the future? The program's emphasis on research versus more of a clinically strong training program. Think about their current residents. Where did they come from? Where did they train? The number of residents. Does your school have a connection with that program? Does your mentor have a connection with any of their faculty? Do they have similar research interests? And this can be an opportunity to ask your mentor where they have connections or where they have good relationships. And then you want to try to do these earlier, prior to the interview season, so that you can try to get some letters of recommendation while you're on your away rotations. When it comes to the location, one of the other things to consider in dermatology is that it tends to be very regional. People tend to mostly get interviews in the area where they train, whether it be the Midwest, the West, the South. And it's just because there are so many applicants that most programs don't need to go far beyond their reach to find somebody that is great. Plus, if you've grown up in that area or lived in that area or did your med school in that area, you're already familiar with the climate and things like that. The way interviews are conducted varies pretty widely across programs. They can be short or long, numerous interviews, group interviews, so just be ready to be flexible and go with the flow and do what they ask of you. Practicing mock questions can be great. It's especially great if your institution can match you up with someone that you haven't worked with, because that will better simulate that awkward meeting someone for the first time situation that's going to come up on your actual interviews. There are lots of resources to help you practice potential interview questions. And preparing for those can be helpful so that when it comes time for the interview, you don't have to think as much. Even if you don't remember exactly what you had rehearsed saying, you'll still have some idea of where to go. So some examples are listed here, things like, why did you choose dermatology? Tell me about a time when you were working with others who disagreed with your opinion. How did you handle it? That's in the realm of what we call behavioral questions, sort of questions that allow you to showcase your skills and behaviors that you've learned and adapted with, and why you'll be a useful resident for, displaying those behaviors. What will you do if you don't match? And then when it comes to thank you letters after the interviews, if a program tells you that they don't want thank you letters or you don't need to send them, you honestly don't need to send them. We're trying to make things easier on you applicants just as much as you're trying to make it easier on us. And we don't want you to have to handwrite a whole bunch of thank you letters when it's not going to influence your chance of matching anyway. So at some point, you're going to have to decide how to make your rank list. It's great to take some notes about each program immediately after the interview day when it's still fresh in your head. You can list the pros and cons. Trust your gut. Don't try to game the system and think this place that said they wanted me more or gave me an indication. Just go with what you feel like you would fit well. This is a little controversial of letting your first choice know that they're your first choice. Most program directors have said this has no influence whatsoever on your rank list, on their rank list, and your chance of ranking high. According to the NRMP rules, you're allowed to reach out and disclose your interests, but you're never allowed to ask others. A lot of programs aren't a big fan of communicating afterward just because, in keeping in the spirit of the NRMP, they would prefer that you only follow up asking about information but not actually disclosing your interests. So it's something to be careful about. Most of all, if you ever even going to consider it, make sure you never send it to multiple programs because we do talk to each other and we'll know you're lying. Another question that comes up during the application process is, what should I do with my intern year, a preliminary year or a transitional year? Both are 1-year internships that you'll complete before your 3 years of derm training. Preliminary years are much more similar or maybe even the same as what the categorical residents are doing their intern year, be it in medicine, surgery, or pediatrics. Therefore, that does put you in a slightly better position if you do not match into dermatology because you're basically now on track in that other specialty. Versus a transitional year tends to not have as many experiences that are core to that specialty. So it puts you in a slightly worse position if you decide that you're not going to go into dermatology. What if you don't match? Ask yourself this question and take it seriously because, like I mentioned earlier, the match rate's about 50%. Very qualified people every year don't match. And sometimes I can't explain why. It is just luck of the draw. So think about your future. Think about what you want to do in the event that you don't match. One option is a research fellowship. Typically, you would complete your intern year because then you can take step 3 and it makes you more useful during the research fellowship because you have a little bit more freedom to see patients. Then you would start a 2-year research fellowship. You don't reapply during your intern year because your application is basically the same as it was. You wait until the first year of the research fellowship to reapply because that's when you've started to have those research experiences and publications kind of rolling in. Then when you match, everyone else in your class needs to complete their intern year, so you do 1 more year of research fellowship, and then you're ready to join your derm program. Another option is dual application. That's where you basically have 2 separate applications, one for derm and then one for whatever other specialty you think would be good for you. So this is great if you have another specialty that you could almost equally see yourself doing or is a really close second behind dermatology. You have a different personal statement, different letters of recommendation. When it comes to dual applying, you can definitely share it with your trusted mentor. Be careful sharing it with anyone beyond that because sometimes the most well-intentioned people don't realize that they're sort of harming your chances of matching. So if you disclose it to a resident, they may leak it to the program that you have a backup plan, so maybe they should consider someone else who's really dedicated to derm. So it's one of those things that you can share with your mentor, but maybe don't share much beyond that. As you've hopefully learned today, dermatology is a highly competitive field. That's why everyone needs a backup plan. You want to stay positive, plan early, be organized, and reach out for help when you have concerns. Remember the struggle and have gratitude during residency for how hard you work to get here and how much it means to you to be a derm resident, because that will always make you a grateful resident and your program director will appreciate that outlook. Thanks so much. Please share your feedback with us using this QR code, which will link to a survey. We're very interested in improving these modules and making them even more useful for everyone interested in applying to dermatology. So we ask that you please take a few minutes to complete a quick survey and leave any feedback that you think would be helpful.